Hi everyone. I think some of attendees left because I think they have exam, which is a bit sad. But now we're going to start the next session, Mission Command Leadership by Mike Comedy. I think you guys had, difference between leaders and managers. I guess anyone, whenever they get promoted, they can be manager, but not necessarily they're leaders. And the leaders doesn't need to be manager. Leaders are more like skill that you have to own whatever you do. Mike has a lot of experience in leadership in associations, not-for-profit, and also in military, and he will share the experience and also what we have to know about leadership. So please welcome Mike.
Thank you.
If you can talk around here.
I've got to talk around there?
Yeah, because there's camera there.
Oh, okay. All right. Well, that's great. Guys, this afternoon, I just want to take, I guess, about an hour of your time this afternoon to talk about a very broad topic, and it's about leadership. Now, I know that today's been taken up with all sorts of accounting skills and certain accounting competencies and subjects you need to be aware of as you start entering your career as an accountant or a bookkeeper and start moving through. What we're going to take a little break from that for about an hour, and we're just going to talk about leadership in general. But what I'd like to zero in on and give you some insight to is that there have been organisations for many, many thousands of years practising leadership. And by and large, that's been the military. Now, be it the military in Egypt or Europe or China or Australia or US, it doesn't really matter. But the military have been practising leadership for thousands of years and by and large do a reasonable job at motivating a group of people to achieve something at the end of the day. And the military have become very good at developing leadership within its officer corps and its soldiers over many, many years. One of the developments the military have determined over the last few years is a development called mission command leadership. Now, I've studied this for many, many years, and in fact, when I was in the military, I practiced mission command leadership for many years. Over the last few years, I've seen leadership in the corporate sector, the government sector, and the not-for-profit and for-purpose sectors, and I've been relatively disappointed with what I'm seeing. That we have a lot of people out there leading organisations who are fundamentally ineffective. And particularly here within Australia, I don't believe that we are well served by many of the leaders of our organisations. Many of these organisations are successful and profitable more by default than by design. At the end of the day, it hasn't necessarily been a product of good leadership. They just happen to have the right service or the right product in the right place at the right time, and often it's more by accident. So I sat back over the last couple of years and I've looked at, I guess, my past learnings in leadership. I've looked at where the corporate sector stands today, and I said, is there anything that we in the corporate sector today, or the government sector or not-for-profit, is there anything we can learn from the military and incorporate into the corporate sector to make our organisations more effective? And I want to share some of those thoughts with you this afternoon. So it's a little bit of a digression away from accounting, but in a sense, it's just as equally as important for you as you're aspiring to move in your organisations to start thinking about leadership and what it means, and hopefully, as potential young leaders moving forward into organisations, do we need to think differently than what we're doing at the moment? All the time. There's no experts in leadership. I'm certainly not an expert in leadership, but I practice, hopefully practice, good leadership as I move forward. And we're going to have a look, as I say, to the potential of the corporate sector. Oh dear, oh dear. No, won't go past that slide.
Sorry.
Oh.
This one and that one.
Yep, that's all I'm pushing. All right, I'll give it a go again. All right, we'll get this right eventually. Okay, why do we need to change and why do we need to think a little bit differently about leadership? Have a look at a couple of points up here. Many Australian workplaces are underperforming. There is absolutely no doubt about that. Our benchmark for organisational performance in Australia is very, very low compared to the rest of the world. And as most of you have travelled or have come from other places around the world, I'd be startled if you didn't recognise the fact that we here in Australia are a fairly lazy, idle bunch when it comes to innovating our businesses and our organisations moving forward. Many Australian organisations don't get the basic right. They don't. Many Australian organisations are out there with no business plan, a haphazard budget, no understanding of risk, staff are poorly trained and motivated, and they just hope that they're going to be successful at the end of the day. Many of our organisations don't seek advice. Many of our organisations don't get the basics right in terms of their strategic or tactical planning, and they're on a wing and a prayer. They just hope at the end of the day that what they're doing will lead to profitability some stage in the future. That's why in Australia, about 82% of all small businesses fail in the first 5 years. They are simply not prepared. They don't have the basics right. Few Australian organisations report high levels of innovation. We are not an innovative organisation or a country. Despite what the Prime Minister keeps telling us about how innovative we are, how well we are at disrupting markets and all the rest of it, we are not innovative. I mean, we still talk about inventing the Hills Hoist bloody clothesline and the Victor motor mower as if there's some sort of achievements that were invented 35 years ago. I mean, for God's sake. So at the end of the day, we are not innovative. We don't think in an innovative context. It's steady as she go, close enough is good enough, she'll be right, mate. I mean, that tends to be the Australian attitude towards business, and that's why we often fail. Any Australian business worth its salt, any Australian business that's dynamic and innovative, invariably go offshore to get into more innovative and broader markets. Many Australian leaders are not well trained for the job. I mean, it is staggering when you look at the statistics that many of our chief executive officers out there have no formal qualifications at all, apart from high school, have attended very few training and qualification frameworks, have not bothered to educate themselves in the practice of their business or their industry or in terms of leadership. They happen to be there again more by default than by design. Too many Australian organisations underinvest in leadership development, especially at the front line. We are not good trainers of our people. We aren't. You can go into the very large organisations who have training budgets, but the training is often poorly designed, it's often poorly directed, and at the end of the day, it's often there as the politically correct thing to do in terms of developing their staff, rather than at the end of the day being dynamic and taking that organisation in terms of its leadership profile forward. The leadership industry, and I term that coin, is that we have an industry here in Australia that I call the leadership industry. They're the guys that get out there with their seminars and their books and their training courses and their leadership luncheons and all the rest of it. And basically, at the end of the day, it's all about convincing you if you follow the 9 steps in my book, you're going to be an effective leader. Or if you attend my course, at the end of this course, you're going to be an effective leader. And the leadership industry, as I call it, has actually hijacked the debate. It's really not about, at the end of the day, trying to identify and develop our future leaders. It's simply about making a buck through selling training courses and books. And so that leadership industry that keep telling us that all you've got to do is follow my 10 steps and you're going to be a leader type approach, which is absolute bunkum, they've hijacked the debate and allowed many, many companies to step back from their responsibility of developing their people and simply sending people on courses. Leadership in Australia does not reflect the wider social diversity. And that's a real challenge for Australian organisations moving forward. By and large, particularly for our larger organisations and many companies operating in the SME sector, leadership, or the managers and the chief executive officer and the CFOs, are primarily white Australian men. Full stop. White Australian men. Now, there has been some limited improvement over the last 10 years, but certainly nothing in terms of getting the diversity and the cultural diversity that we need in our organisations to develop the right people. We don't focus on it, we pay lip service to it, and more importantly, there are very many talented people out there that are from other cultures, that are far more diverse and certainly far more educated, that we are missing out on. And we don't capture those people. Many senior leaders do not draw on advice in making decisions about the future. I get back to my comment that often our managers and our CEOs are poorly educated, and they are poorly trained, and they are poorly led by their boards. The majority of people who sit around board tables these days, here within Australia, are poorly equipped to do so. Very few have any understanding of governance, very few have any understanding of the management of risk, let alone providing support to the CEO with regards to strategic planning, etc. So that's the first problem. Then when you step down into the CEO, many CEOs are not only under-equipped, but they don't even have the common sense to get out there and seek advice on matters they know nothing about or need some assistance with. We just don't do it. Again, we get back to this, she'll be right, close enough is good enough, let's just hope we can make a profit next month. And that's the mindset we're in. And the whole thing boils down to a broader issue of leadership within our organisations. I guess the critical question for me standing here today, in March 2018, is whether Australian leaders, if we can call them that, are ready to meet tomorrow's challenges. Has the extended period of economic growth that we've experienced over the last few years made us essentially lazy? We just don't see the problem moving forward with our organisations and the question of who is going to lead our industry forward, who's going to lead our politics and our economy forward, and how are we going to develop these people? That question is simply not asked. Again, I think, from the Prime Minister down, we just hope that we get through this stuff on a wing and a prayer. When we talk about leadership, and be it within the accounting industry, be it within any industry, what are we actually talking about? I mean, if I was to ask you, what does leadership mean to you? What does it mean? What's a good leader?
Someone who drives us forward.
Someone who drives you forward. Yeah? A good leader. What's leadership mean to you? What's an example of good leadership?
A person who motivates you.
Motivate, so someone who can drive, someone who can motivate.
Someone who can trust its employees.
Trust, someone who can demonstrate trust.
Well, someone who guides the ship.
Guides the ship, yes, driving forward, someone who can point us in the right direction.
Someone who had a good vision.
A good vision?
Yep.
Can sort of step out above the daily fray and the daily drama and look a bit further down the road as to where we're going and why. What is a bad leadership trait? What would you say is that's very poor leadership? Give me an example. anything at the end of the day. They're incapable of pulling it together. What's another poor leadership trait? Someone who's got bad leadership. What would they demonstrate? What do you think?
Not professional.
Not professional. What's professional mean? No, it doesn't mean What else does it mean?
What attitude towards work?
Attitude.
Towards work, like basically they tell you what to do, but like, they don't really stand for the harshly done.
They don't set example. Yeah, I think we're sort of onto the right stuff. I mean, when you look at many of the organisations we have in play, just look at Australian politics. I guess as a classic example, we see it every night on the news, etc. Do you believe our politicians demonstrate effective leadership?
Yeah.
By and large, you believe they do? Wow.
I don't.
You don't?
Oh, no.
No. Why not? What do they demonstrate that says to you, hey, that's not good leadership?
The one thing is they want to keep everything in the white people's hands.
Yep.
I don't know the reason behind that.
Yeah.
Why they don't want to give it to different races.
Yeah.
Australia is a multicultural country.
Yep.
But they are not.
So your view is that these guys sort of fail to understand that what they're dealing with here in Australia today is a whole mixed group of people. They're culturally diverse, they're language diverse, their backgrounds are diverse, their interests are diverse, and yet our politicians don't seem to understand that and will take us. Is that what you're saying? Yes. Okay. All right. So there's a whole host of stuff that tends to stand out. I guess from my perspective, when I go into an organisation, and I consult to many organisations here in Australia, and previous to that overseas, when I go into an organisation, often good leadership is not really apparent. I walk in, the place is going okay, everything looks pretty good, you know, people seem to be reasonably happy in the job, so good leadership doesn't necessarily jump out and bite you. But I tell you what does bite you, bad leadership. I can walk into an office and within 5 minutes can sum that office up as to what sort of leadership prevails in that office. The staff are disgruntled, the place is messy, stuff is out of date, there's shit everywhere, people seem to be taking long lunches, everyone's late for work, etc., etc., etc. They're all sort of indicators there's not good leadership here. So often, very good, effective leadership doesn't necessarily come out and grab you, but poor leadership certainly does. You'll pick it up like that. I guess what we've done over the years, you know, leadership literature and training, etc., has all been about the individual. You know, when we talk of leadership, straight away we start talking about an individual, the CEO, CFO, the managing director, the chairman of the board. We zero in on a particular person. In the military, we don't do that, strangely enough. We don't automatically zero in on a particular person and have expectations about that individual. But our leadership today tends to talk about an individual. We then start framing their responsibilities and their authority and the leadership traits they should demonstrate. We just did it then, did we not? We started talking about the individual, what the individual should demonstrate. The problem is, though, is that when we focus in on the individual and we place all of the responsibility on the individual to lead the organisation, that leads us down the pathway of ensuring that that individual has trained and has the right attributes and has the right competencies, etc., etc. And we send them on courses and we read books and there's the 7 habits of effective leaders and the 9 steps to being an effective leader, etc., etc., etc. But what about the rest of the team? I mean, where do they fit in this whole issue of leadership and the organisation? And what we're going to explore over the next 30 minutes or so is the military approach to this, because it is very different to what the corporate sector sees as the issue of leadership and who should practice it. We call it, essentially, it has the assumption that good leadership when you focus in this space, is based on individuals. Whether they're brave or heroic or they're well educated or they drive the right car or they dress correctly. It's all about the individual in the corporate sector. In the military, it's more about the team and the organisation. And that's a very, very different context. Let's have a look at it. So, currently, we tend to focus on the individual and not necessarily what the organisation is achieving. Can you be a good leader in an organisation that's running at a loss? You can.
Yeah.
Depends on if the loss is more than the stuff.
Now, let's just say, currently we've got, who knows Myers? You know Myers, the shop, the department store? Currently Myers is going broke by the tune of about $300 million every 6 months because they fundamentally have the wrong business model. They are still a bricks and mortar retailer. Everyone's moving online. They're losing customers. They're going broke. The CEO of Myers has been there now for 3 years, and every year he produces a plan that says we're going to solve the problem. He never does. Is he a good leader?
No,
Why not?
because he need to focus on the trend of the market and lead his company, his team to that. Not
Yep.
like
Why not? Is he a good leader? I mean, I've met the guy. He's an outstanding individual. He really is. Well educated, very smart guy, very accomplished, very experienced, has worked in South Africa, has worked in the US, highly successful chief executive officer in the retailing industry, and most people like him. He's a good bloke. Is he an effective leader?
I don't think so.
You don't think so? The point I'm making is that you've got to put leadership in some sort of context. At the end of the day, when we're talking about the corporate sector or the military, it's about what you're achieving at the end of the day. The military has got to win the battle. It has to. The corporate sector must make a profit. It has to survive and continue to grow. So it doesn't matter how good you think the individual may be, the general or the CEO, if they're not winning the battle or they're not making a profit, are they good leaders? They can't be. They might be nice people. They might dress well. They may be highly educated and they may be well liked. But the organisation is not achieving its mission. And so at the end of the day, you would have to say that the individual is not effective. Correct? Would that be a fair call? It doesn't matter how well you like them. The military experience. How did the military think differently? Let's have a look. There's a title called Mission Command Leadership. Don't worry about the title, it's not a big deal. It's just what the military call it. But it's about putting focus on the mission and not the individual. Does that make sense? It's about the mission being important, not necessarily the individual or the leader or the team member or whatever. So that's why they call it Mission Command Leadership. It's about focusing on achievement of the mission. Now, way back, the Prussian military in the 1800s, when militaries were just out there, they were all commanded by individuals, the aristocracy. At the end of the day, the aristocracy would come out, get on their horse and say, away we go, and all the people would follow them. They'd all get up to the hill, and the aristocracy would say, we're going to attack that hill, whether it made sense or not, didn't make any difference, and away they'd go, they'd all run up the hill and they'd all be slaughtered. And this went on for centuries, where individuals were the leaders, and individuals commanded, and they said what had to be done and how it was going to be done, and they ran the show, and everyone else just followed along. Once Prussia had been defeated year after year after year, a couple of Prussian officers stood back and said, this is not working. You know, we just can't rely on individuals running the show. Well, there's got to be a different way we can look at leading our army than this continual chaos with one guy telling us what we've got to do just because he happens to be born aristocracy. So let's get a little bit serious about leadership. So the Prussians started to develop a different model where they looked at the military as being an organisation of people and assets, horses and guns and bits and pieces, but it was an organisation. And then they said, what's the most important thing for this organisation? It's not the leader. What is it? What's the most important thing? It's what that's been designed to achieve, the mission. So the important thing was winning the battle, not necessarily ensuring that Lord Duke Armitage was leading the army. And so they started to think differently, and they said, well, look, really this whole thing has come together to achieve the mission, to win the battle. So can we think differently about the way in which we're being led? And so out of that exercise, and this went on for many, many years, come the Second World War, the German army that had come together after their crushing defeat in the First World War said, we're going to approach the training and the development of our military very differently than what we've done in the past. We're not going to have armies being led by dukes and aristocrats and chancellors and various bloody notatories around the place. We're going to develop professional leaders and professional soldiers. And we're going to design an organisation to win, to achieve the mission. So the German army invented Aufrüstung. Now that's a German term which means mission focused. It's all about the mission, not about the individual, not about the weapons, not about the structures, not about it's about the mission. And when you start thinking in that context, the German army started to think differently. And instead of power and authority being invested in one person, the general, they devolved that power down to the lowest possible level so that everyone in that organisation, everyone in the German army knew what the mission of the organisation was. Everyone. Right down to the lowest soldier. Not only did they know what the mission was, they knew their part in achieving that mission, and they were responsible to contribute to achieving that mission. So for the very first time, it wasn't just one individual that was essentially leading this mass of people. For the very first time, everyone understood the mission, the objective. Everyone knew what their role in that was. And everyone, right down to the lowest soldier, had a responsibility to achieve that mission. Not just to follow orders, not just to flap along and follow the guy in front, but everyone had a responsibility. This was really different stuff. Up until that point of time, armies, similar to corporations, were all commanded by the guy at the top. He had the authority, he was solely responsible, and the rest of us just followed along. So if he said turn left, we all went left. If he said turn left, even if he made bad mistakes, or she made bad mistakes, we just followed. The Germans' approach is very different. A little example. When war broke out, Second World War broke out, and the Germans invaded France, right down to the lowest soldier, everyone knew that the objective at the end of the day was to capture Paris. Everyone knew. It wasn't about all the battles and fights and everything, and bits and pieces to get there. Everyone knew at the end of the day, the German army's mission was to capture Paris. So whether you were a general or a private soldier, you knew that the mission of the army was to grab Paris as quickly as possible. And so the Germans, when they crossed their border into France, you've probably heard the term blitzkrieg, where they just rushed into France, and the French were waiting for them. The Maginot Line was a construction of forts and tunnels and bits and pieces. The French had spent years digging this Maginot Line, facing Germany, and they all stood there, all with their weapons, ready to take the Germans on. What do you think the Germans did? I'll tell you what they did, because what was the mission? The mission was to take Paris, was it?
Yes.
The mission wasn't to stand on the Maginot Line and fight the Germans. They drove around them. They just drove around them. Tens of thousands of Frenchmen are standing there in their pits with all their guns and tanks and everything, all lined up in this great big cement bunker, all ready to take the Germans on. The Germans came up to them and said, well, we get this, but our mission's not to fight you here. If our mission is to get to Paris the quickest time possible, we're just going to drive around you. And they just drove around them and kept going. And they left the Maginot Line with all the Frenchmen standing there. They just left them for the follow-up troops. And invariably, within a matter of hours, all those Frenchmen were isolated from Paris. There was Germans in front of them, Germans behind them, and they all surrendered. And the German units, right down to the lowest soldier, knew that when he confronted something, he made a decision. Do I take this on? Because this is not my mission. My mission is Paris. Or can I get around you somehow and keep going? Because that was the prize at the end of the day. Never been seen before. It took the Allies by absolute surprise. They couldn't understand how every unit in the German army had this mindset, this initiative, this innovation built into the lowest soldier, that the mission at the end of the day was Paris. Get there at any cost. Worry about all the other shit later on. Because they knew once they had Paris, France would fall. And it did. And it did. 1.6 million French troops gave up. Gave up. And Paris was captured. Now, the Germans understood and had indoctrinated their officers, their senior NCOs and their soldiers with this mentality that everyone understood what the mission was. Everyone understood their role, their part that they played in achieving that mission. Everyone down to the lowest soldier was given the initiative and the authority to make those snap decisions on the ground. If they saw a smarter, quicker way of doing something, they were authorised to do it. Not only were they authorised, they were expected to do it. And if they didn't do it, they were sacked. Sacked. And for the very first time, the West, the Allies, saw a totally different model of leadership. And we didn't know what to do. So, as we move forward, they took this experience into the desert with Rommel. They took it into Southeast Asia. The Japanese picked up on it very, very quickly. The Japanese got it. And when the Japanese came down through Southeast Asia, they used similar tactics. In Malaya, as the Japanese came down the Malaysian peninsula, the Australians met them head on with the British. We did exactly the same as the French. We dug in fortifications on the road, we set guns up, we had troops in bloody pillar boxes, we commanded all the roads and all this sort of bits and pieces, and there we were, waiting for the Japanese to come down the road. What did the Japanese do? Their mission was Singapore. Get it. Capture Singapore. Coming down the Malaysian peninsula was just the way to get there. So they met the Australians head on, and what did they do? They fanned out, went through the jungle and just drove around us and kept going. Unit after unit after unit after unit down the Malay Peninsula was essentially just bypassed by the Japanese as they continually made their way to Singapore. And like the French, we stood there like deers in the headlight. We didn't know what was going on. We didn't know how to work with that level of initiative. Japanese platoon commanders and section commanders, young corporals, were making these decisions on the move. They would confront the Australians, too hard, Singapore's where we need to be, do I need to fight this or can I get around this? I can get around, and around they went. And there were the Australians standing there saying, shit, what happened? The Japanese got to Singapore, took Singapore, Malaysian peninsula just collapsed. 24,000 Australians surrendered. The point I'm making here is that within these organisations, and we've been talking about the German military and the Japanese military, there was a different approach to leadership and to the organisation than we had ever seen. It wasn't hierarchical. And a lot of people, when they think of the military, they think of generals and officers and soldiers, and they think hierarchical. The military is actually not like that. It may be structured, where some ranks are higher than others and all the rest of it because they have different responsibilities. But it fights as an organisation. And the Germans and the Japanese got it. Now, eventually, of course, oh, dear, annoying. I think we've got a stoppage here. I'm pushing the wrong button. I guess where we're leading to here, guys, is that the West, the Allies and the military stood back after the Germans and after the Japanese, and we really had a close look at ourselves in terms of how we were going about the organisation and the leadership of our military. And for the very first time, we started to take the issue of leadership very seriously. Now, we end up winning these particular wars, essentially because we had more people and more material out. Didn't mean we were better led by any means. But we ended up winning these wars, but we took a lot of lessons away. And we took those lessons into our confrontation with Indonesia. We took them in our confrontation in Vietnam. We took those lessons away, as did the US military, the British military, the French, etc. We all took these lessons away, and we started to rebuild our militaries, our organisations differently. We got serious about training people in leadership. We got serious about teams and the interaction between teams within an organisation. And this business of everyone understanding what the mission is, everyone understanding their role in that mission, everyone having accountability to do what they had to do to be part of that effort moving forward. So we thought about things differently. And we took those into Vietnam, and particularly the Australian Army. And what we practiced in Vietnam was very different than what we practiced in Europe or in the desert, etc. We organised our people differently, our organisations differently, and certainly the training of our leaders differently. So out of all that, popped out Mike Carmody. That's me. I did 21 years in the military before I entered the corporate sector. I was a Queen's Commission officer in the Armoured Corps, tanks. My service included operational deployment in Southeast Asia, Germany, USA, Canada, the Federal Republic of Germany, and my last role was here as Australia's counter-terrorism expert in aviation. I then went into the corporate sector around about 93, 94, and within that, as CEO and as a director, I managed 2 global service organisations and 2 national peak bodies. That's a little bit about me. In these lessons that the military painfully learnt over the last 100 years or more about organisations, teamwork, the mission, leadership, unity of purpose, how we communicate, is there anything there that the corporate world could learn from? And I suspect there is. I suspect there is. Let's have a look at a few things. Oh, for Christ's sake. Oh, dear. This is very, very annoying. I think it might be the clicker, is it?
Yeah, I think
I
that's.
think it is. These buttons.
Maybe I could just click it.
Anyway, that's okay. Mission command leadership, or some people just call it command leadership. It doesn't matter what you call it at the end of the day. I guess there are 5 things that come out to me. When I was a military officer, there were 5 things that I practiced. And I think we've covered a few of them in our last discussion. Unity of purpose. Everyone understanding what the mission or the intent of the mission and the commander is at the end of the day. Everyone understanding. If you go into an organisation today, you know, small business, large business, medium business, and you sit down with the receptionist on the front desk, and if you said to that receptionist, what's the strategic business objective of the organisation you work for, do you think she could tell you? I suspect not. I suspect not. If I went to even some of the managers in marketing or operations or administration, and I said to them, what's the mission, what's the strategic business objective of the company? What ultimately are you here to achieve? You know, very few could tell you, and you know what's disturbing me? Very few care. Very few care. Oh, I don't know, mate, you know, I'm just here to sell stuff. Or I'm just here to do the payroll. Or I'm just here to make the bloody thing, mate. I don't know, someone else sells it. I mean, that's the sort of approach you often get talking to Australian businesses. That unity of purpose, having everyone in the organisation understand what the intent, what the mission, what the business objective is absolutely critical. Because if they don't understand, if they don't understand, they can't contribute. They don't know what their role is in the organisation. Like, if you were to go to a company here in Canberra and you were to talk to the receptionist on the front desk and she said, well, I don't know, they don't tell me, I'm just the receptionist, that's probably the reply you'll get, then how the hell do we expect her or him to contribute to the success of the company? They don't even know what the company's trying to achieve. So this business of understanding what the purpose, what the mission, what we're actually there for at the end of the day, this organisation, is imperative. Because unless everyone from the top all the way down to the receptionist understand what the hell they're there for, how can the organisation work? It can't. It's just fragmented with everyone fundamentally just doing their own thing. As we say here in Australia, thumb in bum, looking out the window, waiting for 5 o'clock to go home. The next thing that came across to me was shared responsibility. Again, if you go into this same organisation in Australia and you ask the marketing guy about what the purpose of the organisation is, and he says, I don't know, mate, I'm just the sales guy here, you know, I just sell these bloody things, I don't know what the organisation is about, what it's seeking to achieve. You need to know what your responsibility is and how that contributes to the achievement of that mission. Extremely. Now, I don't know how many bloody lectures and programs I've attended where people talk about, oh yeah, it's very important to have open communication in a company, blah, blah, blah. What bullshit. Most of them communicate with no one. True open communication is rarely practiced in Australian organisations. That's where the young lady on the front desk, who has been in the company 3 months, feels not only confident of walking into the CEO's office and saying, Mike, I think we've got something going wrong here. I think I have a better option as to how that front desk should be managed, and I need some investment to install a new phone system. Not only is confident in doing that, but believes it's her responsibility to do that in an honest way. Open communication is about the ability of anyone in that organisation being able to openly communicate in a positive context with anyone else, from CEO to receptionist. And what I mean about a positive context is that you go in there because This is your business as well. You understand what the business is trying to achieve. You understand at the end of the day your role in there, and you have a contribution and a responsibility to step forward. If you have a good idea, you can see something that needs to be fixed, you can see an area that we can innovate or do something differently, you should have the confidence in open communication to talk to anyone in a positive context. Now, people talk about that. It is rarely practiced. Rarely practiced. There's often the management team and then the rest of the guys out here and some guys out the back, and only these guys get to talk about this stuff, and no one really wants to hear from the girl on the front desk. And sometimes the best ideas come from the shop floor of what needs to be done. So we talk about it, we sing its praise, but very few people understand open communication. You know that in the military, people think that there's this structure where you've got the officer and the private soldier down here, and the private soldier can't say a word to the officer. That is so wrong. In the military, every soldier in the military understands that it's his or her responsibility to raise an issue, a problem, a drama, a better way of doing things, or whatever, to whomever in that platoon, company, brigade, division, or whatever it happens to be. When I commanded my squadrons, in Vietnam of tanks, I would have young tank drivers, 18 years of age, come up to me and say, "Jesus, sir, that was shit. We've got to do this better next time. What I saw was this, and this. I reckon if we did this, and this, I think we'd get a better outcome." And 9 times out of 10, they were bloody right. And so that communication between organisations and people in the military is ongoing. Yes, of course they have, levels of command. He would talk to his corporal would talk to his sergeant, etc., etc. That's often where the problems get resolved. So if you can resolve the problem at the lowest level, you do it. So if this young soldier could go to his sergeant and talk to his sergeant about the problem and the problem is resolved, good. That's what the structure is designed to do. If it needs to come to me, good. Now, it may be a silly idea, the guy may have read it wrong, etc., but I can explain that, and he either goes away happy or thinks, "Oh, well, I'll give that a go," and away he went. So open communication is more than just writing on the wall, and it implies a real maturity in an organisation. Organisations need to be mature. As CEOs, as senior managers, you've got to have the bloody balls to sit there and have the young receptionist come in and say, "I think I've got a better way of doing this. And this is what I think we should do. We should replace that old phone system. I'll be able to then spend more time doing this. And at the end of the day, I'm going to be able to do that and that far better than what I'm doing at the moment." And you've got to sit there and say, "Jesus, that's a good idea." And accept it and give credit where it's due. We talk about it, we theorise about it, you find it in every book, but in Australia we rarely do it. Bias for action. The fourth one. What I do find in Australian organisations is that we spend a lot of time talking, a lot of meetings. We spend a lot of time planning. We're not necessarily good at doing. In other words, we seem to procrastinate a lot. At every level, not just at the CEO level, but at management, at team leader, we procrastinate a lot. We and ah, we have these bloody meetings that go on forever, the agendas are usually vague, the minutes are usually vague, and at the end of the day, not a lot gets done. The fourth principle under mission command is a bias for action. If you're not going to action something, in other words, if you're not going to do something, don't talk about it. You have a responsibility. The Japanese and the Germans had a bias for action at the lowest levels. They ran up against the French, and the young commanders ran up against them and said, "Shit, do we have to fight this? Can we get round it because we know the objective is Paris?" They didn't have to refer to anyone. They took the action there and then and said, "Drive around it." Done. Why could they do that? They knew what the intent of the senior commander was, and that was Paris. Because if they took Paris, everything could fall. They didn't have to fight battle after battle after battle after battle. Now, sometimes they may have to fight if they can't get around. And they may have to fight, roll over it and keep going. Do you ever see any of that sort of bias for action in Australian organisations? Very rare. Very rare. And you rarely see it being taken at the lower levels of the staff. They either don't have the confidence, they don't have the ability, they don't think they've got the responsibility, and they don't really understand what the business is trying to achieve anyway. Why would they take? Esprit de corps is about trust, friendship and teamwork. If there's any one thing that the military focuses on every day, every minute of the day, it's developing teamwork. What the military corps call esprit de corps. You've often heard it, and I'm sure you've heard it on the movies, that when soldiers go to war, they don't fight for their company, for their country. I've never met a soldier yet who fights for his country. No one fights for their country. No one gives a shit about that. When you're out there in the trench, in the jungle, you don't give a shit about the country. You don't give a shit about the flag. What do you fight for?
Or your friends?
Yeah, you fight, first and foremost, for your unit. And you fight for your mate next to you. And you fight for your platoon. And you fight for your esprit de corps, your trust, your friendship, your mates. That's what you fight for. When the shit hits the fan, that's what you fight for. And that just doesn't happen. The military spends years developing esprit de corps at battalion level, company level, platoon level, section level. Every level has a esprit de corps. When you go out as a platoon, you fight as a platoon. No matter what happens, no man gets left behind. Every man fights for the guy alongside him. Everyone understands what the platoon commander is trying to achieve, and above him the company commander, etc., etc. We all know why we're there. And we all know at the end of the day, if we can see a smarter way of doing it, we do it. And we take action at the lowest levels. And there's absolute open communication and trust. If you're standing in a bloody pit or in a tank, let me tell you, you better trust the guy standing next to you with your life. With your life. In the military, you know how we measure poor leadership? We don't measure it off a balance sheet. We don't measure it on the P&L. You know how we measure poor leadership? Body bags. That's how the military measures poor leadership. Body bags. So it's not a matter of getting a poor P&L. It's not about getting a poor write-up in the annual report. It's not about running at a loss for this month. Poor leadership in the military is measured in body bags. That makes things very different. But the same principles apply. If you don't have that trust, that friendship, that teamwork, that esprit de corps, that comradeship within the company and everyone in the company, how the hell are you going to achieve these other things? It all rests on that. And if I was to say to any aspiring manager or CEO or anything, and they said to me, what do you think I should do first? I would say build trust, build comradeship, build teamwork by any mechanism you can think of. Because until you get that right, until everyone in the company can work together, trust each other, are friends and comrades, and can get that together, nothing else is going to be achieved. How are you going to have open communication or a bias for action or a unity of purpose if people in that business can't work together and can't trust each other? And it may well mean in that process that you've actually got to be very selective in who you recruit into the company. Because if your company consists of all square pegs, then you better get a square peg. Don't get a round one, because they're not going to fit. So again, there are 5 key principles on which mission command leadership is based. They are applicable in the military and have been practiced for decades and have proven to work. There's something in this for the corporate sector. There is. There's something in this. But it demands a lot more from the corporate sector than what it's prepared to give at the moment. So let's just have a quick look at that. So you've got your leader and the team, right? And around that you've got these three core areas that you need to focus in on. Let's just quickly have a look. Oh.
Yeah.
The leader. A couple little things in there, and I think we brought out a few of these when we asked around earlier on. Knows and understands their people. And when I say this stuff, you can read this crap in a book. You can go to one of these bloody leadership seminars and you open up on page 10 and it talks about understand your people. And you just gloss over it and keep going. The difference between the military and the corporate sector is that you truly have to embrace this stuff. You really do need to fully understand the people you're working with. Because that guy or that lady is going to be flying your bloody helicopter or standing in the bloody trench next to you, and your life will depend on them. So you really need to understand them.
Yep, so just a quick question.
Yeah.
So if you how would you empower them, to
Yeah.
make them say whatever they want?
I think you're right. I think let's just go around. Let's just have a talk about how do you empower people. The way you empower people, if we go back to those 5 key principles, if everyone in this room understood, if we were a little organisation, if we were a business, if we all understood what we were here as a business to achieve, it's the first thing. We all have a very clear understanding of what we're about to achieve over the next 12 months, wherever it is, as a business. First thing. Second thing is, if we all understood where we fit in that puzzle, what is your role and responsibility? What are you accountable for in achieving that? You know precisely what you need to do, and more importantly, you know what the guy next to you is doing and what that guy is doing. And you understand you're responsible for it. Not just the leader, not just me as the CEO, you too. You are responsible to ensure we achieve the mission by doing your bit as best as you possibly can. If you are confident that you can turn to anyone on that table or to me and suggest a better way of doing things, in other words, we have the trust between us, because you know me as well as I know you, then there's a good chance you're going to step forward and say what needs to be said, good and bad, but in a constructive context, right? If at the end of the day, with knowing what we need to do, knowing your role in it, and that you have the confidence that you can communicate to anyone in this room, are you more likely to take action? Of course you will. Because you know where the bloody hell you're going, and why you're going there, and what your role in it is. Wouldn't you? And the last thing is that if we worked as a team, and we had that team spirit, and you felt good about it, and you knew that your team members would follow you and support you, does that answer your question?
Yeah. But the thing is, in order to work in a group, right? So how would you embrace the harmony feels around?
Like how would you achieve it?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's like when you talk about the sort of trust and the camaraderie.
Yeah, because how do you build trust? Because you can't just trust a person.
No. It's got to be built up.
Yeah.
And you can use a variety of techniques to build that trust, technique, comradeship, etc. First and foremost, ensuring, and let's have a look, it's a good question, let's have a look at it. I'll just jump a few slides here because I think the point you're raising is a very good point. You're down around here. My point is that this doesn't happen instantaneously. That at the end of the day, I as the CEO, I need to be competent. I need to understand issues of governance and planning, marketing and operations, etc. So I need to be competent. I need at the end of the day to understand that the team that I'm going to form around me need to understand what we're about, where we're going and why.